highlighted. There was a lot of information came out in that last session, wasn't there? And which is really good. We will get notes out. So our whole idea is that all of this is available. What I'm going to say, there won't be slides, but it is all in hard copy, so we can get all of this out as a pack to you. So then you've got all of that information to just kind of have a look through at leisure afterwards. The third thing to say is we are going to be repeating this, not repeating the sessions, but repeating the principles. So we want to have 3 apologetics days a year. That's where we want to kind of head. And so we will look at all sorts of different things. And the idea will be to drill as deep down as we can, because we want people to be as armed as possible. So, for instance, Matthew and I have already planned out the next session. We were just saying, I was thinking of doing this. And Matthew was going, I was thinking of doing that. And he went, well, we've just planned the next one already, haven't we? We went, yeah, you're probably right. But we look at things like other religions. And so what we want to do is not just look at the principles of say, okay, well, where is there good in other religions and where are the challenges? What we want to be saying is, okay, well, let's have a look at what other religions actually believe. Comes back to the straw man principle that Matthew was highlighting. That the problem is, I used to spend a lot of time with Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. I actually had a Mormon, after spending some time with them, actually give me a hug and through tears kind of said, just thank you. And I was just like, what for? We've disagreed. And they said, you're the first Christian I have spoken to who's actually taken the time to listen to me and treat me with respect. And that broke my heart. I'm sorry, because I just thought, I was offended, because I thought, on behalf of Christians, because I thought actually we should be leading the way in actually being gracious. Even if you disagree with what I say, I shouldn't be offensive towards you, because that's not leading you to the gospel, is it? That's pushing you away. And so understanding what people believe and when they're coming, this is why, I said, we've got to be good at asking questions. We really have. And we've got to be good at kind of understanding things. Can I say just one final point before we get into the first session on suffering? It's great, isn't it? You get a session on head knowledge with Matthew, and then you get 45 minutes of suffering with me. So there we go. One of my other subjects I've got in the back of my folder here is I've got I heard Greg Haslam. Many of you may have known of Greg Haslam, Westminster Chapel. He was there for a number of years. He's gone to be with the Lord now. And he did a fantastic day on looking at the whole theology of hell. And so I thought, actually, this is really good. This is just something we don't teach a lot on. Or when was the last time you heard, anything on church in that? So I thought, well, that would be good. So we entitled A Day in Hell with Carl. And I thought, that's probably not the way to title these things. We don't think these things through sometimes, do we? But can I say, apologetics is a way for us. We want to be listening to people and we want to be speaking to people in such a way that we're leading them almost to the water to drink. Apologetics doesn't save people. No. God does. Can I say that? But for me, apologetics is this thing. In the Gospels where Matthew talks of sowing the seed. In Matthew, Jesus talks of sowing the seed. And he talks about some of it going on the rocky ground. And the birds snatch it up. Now, we have a lot of rocky ground out there. We do. There are a lot of objections to the Christian faith. And if we can somehow just break that ground first before we sow those seeds, then aren't we helping people on the way to discovering Jesus? And so apologetics, think of it like this, that you're breaking that hard ground that maybe is an objection to the Christian faith, where they go, actually, that might be a possibility. What Matthew has brought this morning is kind of saying, do you know what? There's a possibility here that what I've been being taught in schools for all these years in terms of, that this bit is fact, actually, maybe it's not all fact. There's just a possibility that you and I can now talk at a level because maybe what you're saying is true. Maybe there is possibility for a designed, universe rather than just a random universe. And once you've opened that door, when you start to scatter the seeds of the gospel they're going on more fertile soil. Did you see? And that's really helpful. So think of it in this way, that this is training for us, this is learning for us, because I found lots of times, actually, I remember doing an alpha course, taking someone through an alpha course, and at the end of it, this couple, they were fantastic, they didn't get saved. But it really bothered me, because I like seeing people come to know Jesus, I just do. And I went round to this couple's house, and we over a cup of tea, I said, I'm going to ask you a question. Why haven't you given your life to Jesus yet? And they said, you haven't answered my questions. They said, you've come and you've taught me about prayer and you've taught me about God and whatever and stuff, but I think science has disproved God, and there's so much suffering in the world, and I thought, that's really interesting. Alpha would have been good for them after answering some of those questions. Do you see? And so I thought, and they were going on a round the world trip for a year or whatever, and so, that opportunity in one sense was lost, but I have to trust that God will do whatever he will do with the seeds that I had sown. And that got me thinking, actually we need to spend more time listening to people and hearing what's really going on and the questions that they have, because people do have questions. It's not actually as cold and as dark out there as we think. And so I just want to kind of say that as I come to talk about what I'm going to talk about now, which is, how can a God of love allow suffering? And for us as Christians, this is on two levels, because we've got to talk to people out there about this, but at the same time, we also ask this question of ourselves, don't we? Because there's a second question in this. If there is a God of love and we're his children, why does God allow Christians to suffer? And we wrestle with that. Now, I'll tackle that more this afternoon. So now I'm going to talk in the general principles of how we answer that question to those who might just ask that question out there. But then this afternoon, what I'd like to do is drill down a little bit more in that for us as Christians, because I think sometimes if we haven't got these things sorted ourselves, it's really hard for us to answer the questions out there, isn't it? Well, actually, what I'm saying to you, I'm not sure I believe anyway. Do you see what I'm saying? And so we'll tackle that at two levels today, if that's okay. So we're just going to look at this whole thing of suffering. Now, can I say that when we come to talk about this, particularly when we're talking about personal and emotional objections to Christianity, you have to ask, what is the question behind the question? See, I find most people who ask me, why does a God of love allow suffering? What they're actually meaning is, when I was a kid, my mum died. Why did God take my mum away? When I, 5 years ago, got diagnosed with cancer and it's still there and I'm having to live with it every day, why would God allow that? Why, when I was on holiday, did we experience 2 weeks later scenes on the TV of a tsunami hitting that very place and killing people we'd had coffee with only 2 weeks earlier? There's often a question behind the question, particularly when they're emotional questions. And we need to understand that. We also need to be sensitive to it. So I will say with this subject, please, I'm not going to give pat answers. Because sometimes we can give a pat answer and we can send that person away, and actually that's not helped them at all. Unless their name is Pat, and it might help them. So I don't know. But yeah, but you see, so giving people a book isn't helpful sometimes around the suffering one. I love The Reason of God by Tim Keller. It's a fantastic book, really good writer. But I would say when it comes to the section on suffering, it's brilliant. I would agree with it. All at an intellectual and academic level, I would agree. But the problem is, it's very hard to empathise with somebody in a book. Do you see? So they might give an answer and you go, well, yeah, but that wasn't the same for me in my situation. So what is the question behind the question? With apologetics, I touched on this a little bit. I would say, you've got to be thinking, what aspect of the gospel does this question challenge? So when somebody is asking me a question, I'm always thinking all the time, okay, where is this a problem for me? Well, where do I think in the Bible that actually this is a challenge, this is wrong? All roads lead to God, don't they, surely? Well, I know Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So I know instantly they're now at conflict with my faith. Do you see? So I'm thinking that's the challenge. That's a truth I'd love to get in. But actually, so I'm aware of that objection, but I just want to hear them and see why they believe that, where they've come from, what their religious background is. But all the time, I'm fully aware of what the objection is. Do you see? And so when it comes to suffering, it's kind of say, okay, so what are they asking? Are they saying that all human beings shouldn't suffer? You know? I would always ask what's a non-negotiable here, and I touched on that earlier, you know, when you're saying, you know, is there a non-negotiable? I would say, right in conclusion, in terms of what I'm going to say over this next half an hour or so that remains, is to say, you know, when it comes to suffering, the non-negotiable is this: we live in a fallen world. There is sin in the world, and therefore sin is the result, sin is the cause, ultimately, of suffering. However, if I lead with that, what that person might hear is me saying, actually, because you're a sinner, you're suffering. Ooh, that's dangerous. Because now I've alienated that person. Does that make sense? And actually, I've also said something that possibly isn't quite, they've heard it, not how it was intended. Therefore, they now believe something about my faith which isn't true. Because I believe that sin is behind all suffering, but I'm not never going to say to somebody, well, actually, you're a sinner, Bill, and therefore, you know, actually every bit of suffering that you've had, you deserved in your life because of the sin that you did when you were 5. But I've heard that said before. That's not helpful. So we have to look at that and say, okay, what's going on? You know, I asked this question, what scriptures support this? Which Matthew was doing. Pretty, you know, actually, well, let's look at what does the Bible say about this? What does the Bible have to say? Because I do believe the Bible is the Word of God. I'm glad you think that's a good thing. But I do because I'm a Christian. So actually, I believe it's my manual for life, and particularly around emotions and kind of, you know, just our own humanity and who we are and suffering. The Bible has a lot to say on it. Both to us as Christians, as we'll come to this afternoon, but also to a world out there that's hurting. And then always I want to say, whenever I meet someone, if I can leave them with one truth, what would it be? You know, if there is something I can leave them with, some deposit, something from God, something that God might just say through me, just by his grace, what can I leave them with? And always that's my goal when I'm talking to people and particularly meeting people, you know, out there. So as I said, you know, I've had Jehovah's Witnesses knocking on my door for 3 months. It took them 3 months before they asked me what I did for a living, which is fantastic, because they were just interested in telling me what they wanted to believe. And I would go, oh, that's a really interesting question. What about this then? Oh, they go, that's a real, we've not thought about that. There's this, no, I don't want to know what the book says. What do you think that means? Off they went, came back 2 weeks later with somebody else. Sunday afternoon, they sat there, didn't they? It was like 3 months this went on for, until in the end they brought someone very senior from their church. He said, may I ask you a question? I said, yes. What do you do for a living? I said, I work for a church, I'm an evangelist. That's lovely. Look, you know where we meet. This is our card. If you'd like to come along, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, goodbye. And off they went. And that was it. That was the end of it. 3 months. But this lady who'd been coming, she was just like, oh, you mean I'm allowed to think for myself? I'm allowed to engage my brain? I'm allowed to ask these questions? Do you see? And so this is all really, this is just a big love of mine. So coming down to suffering, I just want to say this is probably one of the biggest questions we have and people have, because all people have suffered to some degree. And just because you and I may not have suffered as much as the next person, or they may not have suffered as much as I have, doesn't make it any less real. You know, people say to me, well, you know, I'm going through this really hard time at the moment, but it doesn't compare to what's happening in Ukraine. No, it doesn't. But it doesn't make it any less real for you. And actually, what you're going through at the moment, what they're going through, I wouldn't want to wish on anybody, absolutely not. But I wouldn't want to wish what you're going through on anyone at the moment. That's really, did you see? And so actually just taking the time to sit with the person and just hear what's going on and where they're at is really, because I would have no doubt, if I went round this room, we've all suffered in some way at some point. And we've done this, why does God allow suffering, as a session with unbelievers. And I'll tell you, normally, it's the end. I've never seen it. We go into a ministry time at the end of it with unbelievers. Because they've all suffered. And actually, there's just something of, as you talk through this stuff, the goodness of God comes through. And people just want you to hug them. Talk to them. let them weep together. The Bible says to do these things. And so it's being aware that, it will cause people to ask very real questions. Can I also say, as Christians, we may not have all the answers to this, but we can certainly try to understand. I don't know why certain things in my life have had to happen. I don't know why we've suffered the losses that we have. I could sit here and say, God, why did you allow that to happen? The reality is he may never answer that question. And so we can't just keep coming out with every answer to every question, because actually we don't always know, but there are some principles. Is this okay? You with me still?
Yeah.
Good, you're good. Okay. And having the answers to questions, we've got to be careful, because when we were in the Peak District, we were involved with the church there, and our second child, all of our children are grown up now. We have grandchildren, and but our second son was second child, first son was born, and he was born at exactly the same time as this young lad named Jacob in the church, literally a couple of weeks apart, and Jacob was born with a hole in the heart. Our son comes out of hospital as normal, you normally do. And Jacob did not. Jacob spends 6 months in hospital, 6.5 months in hospital, getting towards 7 months, and they think they've done enough to be able to send Jacob home. And Jacob goes home. We're out one Saturday, and I get home to an answer machine message. We'd been out all day. It was back before the mobile phones, and so we were uncontactable. Get home to an answer machine message. Lunchtime this was. Carl, you need to get to the hospital quick. Please, Jacob has been taken in. We want you to come and pray. This is at 4:15. By the time I managed to get through to anybody, they said, don't worry, he's gone. And Jacob had died. No explanation why my son was perfectly okay and sat playing in the living room, and Jacob had gone. What I did notice was his mum and his dad, who were strong Christians. No, mum wasn't, his dad wasn't. His mum was, dad wasn't, that's right. Mum was. They had a funeral. I stayed home, because we felt it would be insensitive to take an 8-month-old to the funeral of a lady. We just weren't sure how good that would be. So Pam went, I stayed home. And then a week and a half later, I was down to talk on why God allows suffering at the Sunday meeting. And the mum was there, sat in the front row. And I talked through some of the stuff I'm going to talk you through today, and I said it, and I'll tell you what, it was the most nervous I'd ever felt, the most unqualified I'd ever felt to speak. I was just like, how dare I speak on this when she sat there? And as soon as we finished, I went straight over to her to apologise and to say, how dare I speak? I'm sorry, I just, even the title, it was just the timing and everything. And she came over and said, I just wanted to come over to you to apologise. I said, what for? She said, me sat there, she said, must have made it really awkward for you, and that's not right. I said, you have got to be kidding me. I said, you've got nothing to... And she said, no. She said, I'm so sorry. And she hugged me. And she said, I just want you to know it's okay. And she'd found some peace. She'd found some strength in God to be able to strengthen others around her. And I'm thinking, how dare I say this stuff? Do you know what I mean? I wasn't qualified. And I'm just like, I just moved. She was moving around at the funeral. She was just ministering to people. She'd found a peace in God over it. She thanked God for the 8 months she did have and not the years that she'd lost. I was just moved by that. Guys, we don't know people's stories. This is someone who we were in church with, we spent time with, we got to know, we'd seen their journey. Sometimes when people ask you this question, you don't know anything about their journey. They've just asked you that question, but there could be all of this going on behind them. And they could have sat on it for 20 years. Do you see? This is why it's really important that we ask questions and do it. But I want to explore some points coming out of one of these biggest questions. Firstly, can I say that anyone asking that question to me, proves the very existence of God. You'll say, why? Well, because if we believe to the belief that it is about survival of the fittest, and it is about actually natural selection, and we believe that actually it's all random and it's inconsequential, then actually, what does it matter? Isn't it right that actually the stronger one survived and the weaker one? Because actually, isn't that what we're saying survival of the fittest is? Are we not? That's natural selection. You know, you're asking a question about pain and hurt, but actually you're coming from a belief system that says that actually we think the fittest should survive and the weakest should be culled, because that's how, you know, nature progresses and how it's continued for millennia. But we don't. We're hurt by it. We're incensed by it. Whether you're a Christian or not, you're moved to do something about it. Are you not? That's why there's so many. There is so much good out there, whether it's Christian or not. We have to recognise that. Do you know what I mean? That the response to suffering by aid agencies and organisations around the world is fantastic. But why do people do that when they haven't got God in their lives? Is it because they maybe are created in the image of someone who does care? Maybe is it because there's a scripture that talks about eternity being set in our hearts? Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that actually, whether they realise it or not, suffering matters because actually people matter, because we all have value and worth. And that's what you're dealing with when you're talking to people. You're going, actually, that's really interesting. You're asking that question. Well, to me, that, you know, now I wouldn't go straight in and say, well, you've asked that question. To me, that proves that you believe in God. Ooh, what are you saying then? And that's it, end of conversation. But what I'm saying is I'm listening and I'm building this stuff up. Can you see? And I'm thinking, well, that's really interesting. You've got that standpoint, but you don't believe in God. Okay, well, we'll come back to that maybe. You know, I said this the other evening, so forgive those who heard this. But you know, you've only got to look at things like revenge stories and things like that. You know, and saying, you know, near where Bill lives in High Hall, I did actually run a rat over a few years ago, and you know, a few days later when I went back down that road, there wasn't several rats with pitchforks and blades and everything waiting to get me back and take revenge. You know, we talked a little bit about, well, you know, do monkeys take revenge, or is it just kind of, you know, we touched on that a little bit. But if you look at the animal kingdom outside of Hollywood, where you get films like even killer whales taking revenge. If you've ever seen the film Orca the Killer Whale, back in the 1970s, a killer whale that goes and takes revenge on a sea captain and everything else. And yeah, I mean, do you know what I mean? But what Hollywood has done is it kind of humanises animals to the point that actually they now carry the characteristics of humans, and they go out and take revenge and do all this stuff. But the reality is they don't. It's only in human beings there's this sense of injustice. What is revenge about? It's the sense of wanting to right a wrong. Do you see? And so we've got all of that. So people who are out for justice, it's because they've got this sense of right and wrong in them. Because they're created in this image of one who cares. So I think, you know, us asking that question, you know, is a really important one. The second thing, you know, to touch on is looking at this thing, you know, why does God allow suffering? Now, can I say, even with that, and we'll do this a little bit more later, I'm happy with that question, why does God allow suffering, when I'm talking with somebody who's an unbeliever. Because I think to get into the area of sometimes God causes suffering is a difficult area. But we've only got to look through the Old Testament to see that there were times where God actually not only allowed suffering, but almost directly caused it. Do you hear what I'm saying? So there are some times where God actually punishes sin, so allows sickness and various things to happen, and you think, okay, there's suffering going on there, and God is doing something about it. So God is almost causing it, not just allowing it. And that's another theological kind of, minefield we'll try and unpack a little bit this afternoon. And if I don't answer it satisfactorily, I'm so pleased Nelson's arrived, because Nelson will now take all the questions on that one. But there you go. But no. So what we need to do is establish the fact of this. Look, we live in a fallen world. And suffering is the result of living in a fallen world. I would say the majority of suffering that we see in the world around us, and it's helpful just to help people kind of get them to think about this. The majority of suffering is usually caused by others. Put natural disasters and stuff to one side for now, but the majority of what we see in terms of suffering is caused by others. So aside from the sickness things, people grow up sometimes in some horrendous situations. People have to witness horrendous things and see really challenging things, and that's caused by the suffering. So caused by others who are causing others to suffer. People who get hurt, they get hurt because they've been hurt by another person. They get hurt because somebody's said something or put them down. Even simple things like, you'll never amount to much. If that's spoken over you as a child and keeps being spoken over you, do you know the damage that can do to you when you're older? And so somebody who says, I've suffered and I've gone through this, and you listen to that, you think, well, actually, you might not think that's a big thing if you've grown up in an affirming household. But if you haven't grown up in an affirming household, you won't understand that. But it's important too. And so drawing alongside people and spending time, just getting to hear what's going on and helping them to say, well, the first thing is this. A lot of the suffering that we see in the world, sadly, is caused by other people. And that's true, isn't it? And that is the challenge of living in what we as Christians would call a fallen world. That we live in a fallen and broken world. We would say that people have wronged against God, and that wrongdoing is sin. And so by living in a sin-filled world, now the results of sin and the fruits of sin is suffering. And then you get the great comeback. Well, if God is so all-powerful then, why doesn't he do a Bruce Almighty on us, if you've ever seen that film, which is a cracking film. I still think the best bit is when the dog is sat on the toilet reading the newspaper. And because I look at our dog sometimes and it's chucking it down outside, and I'm thinking, if I could just get you to go on that toilet, it would save me getting wet. Do you know what I mean? It's just great. But I'm not sure I'd get you reading the newspaper. Better books than that, maybe. So that's the question that people say. Well, if God is so all powerful, why doesn't he just do it then? Why doesn't he stop it? Okay. Well, let's think that one through then. Why doesn't God stop it? What if God chose to say, right, well, David, from now on, you're going to not be able to do anything wrong at all or harm anyone ever again? What have I just done to David? Taken away his personality? I've taken away his choice, his free will. Absolutely. All of a sudden, David loses any sense of free will. And God never intended you and I to be born as robots. He could have made robots very easily. He made the man who made the robots. He knows what he's doing, He's just like, I could have made you robots, and we could have all walked around this earth, and we wouldn't have even been here now, and we'd be like, I love you, God. I love you, God. I love you, God. I love you, God. And just doing as we're told and going around and everything like that. But that's not love. Love is a choice, isn't it? Those of you who've been in any form of relationship know love is a choice. Because I tell you what, sometimes I have to choose to love that person. I don't just feel it. I love my wife. I feel it all the time.
Good save.
Yeah. So, see, there you go. You see, I caught that. There you go. But isn't that true? It's a choice, isn't it? There's that old Don Francisco song. Jesus didn't die for you because it was fun. He hung on the cross because it had to be done. He was sweating. It said, drops of blood Why? Because actually he knew what he was about to have to do. He wasn't doing it going, yippee, I can't wait to do this. This is really good. You know, oh, I'm feeling this warm, gushy feeling towards this human race right now. He's thinking, this is the only way. I don't want to do it, but this is the only way. And it was hard. But it was a choice because he loved. And love is a choice. Therefore, to be in any form of relationship with a loving God, actually, we need to be able to choose that relationship with that loving God. We need choice. And if we can choose to do the right things, what else can we choose? To do the wrong things. And there's your problem. We live in a fallen world, and sadly, sometimes people will choose to do some really wrong things. Sometimes people will choose to do those things that will hurt and affect and cause people to get hurt. And that's that free will that God has given us. Now, there's the promise in Scripture, isn't it? One day it's all going to be wrapped up and it's all going to be, and it's all going to be absolutely wonderful and glorious when we get to glory. And it's not a case that he takes away our free will. It's a case that those that believe in him and know him, you won't want to sin because you've tasted of him and you've seen that he is good. There just won't be the opportunity to sin because you just won't want to. So God's love is to allow us to choose. God loves us enough to let you have that choice, which means sometimes you can do things wrong. And when I'm talking to someone, it's helping them saying, actually, do you know, God loves you so much that actually he allows you to choose to do right and wrong. And I've no doubt you've been hurt. I've no doubt that you've suffered. And I've no doubt you've probably made some wrong choices along the way yourself. That's not pointing the finger back. It's just saying, this is just, But God so loves you, and he so loves everyone, that actually he gives them the opportunity. And sometimes they do some really stupid things with their choices. Our grandson, bless his heart, just before he leaves here, Matthew says to me, he says, oh, we've only had one kid run into that door a couple of times. He said that glass door. I said, don't worry, we'll keep an eye on them and they won't do that or whatever and stuff like that. What does he do? Gets really excited just as he's about to leave, bang, runs into the glass door, smack straight onto the floor. We all do silly things. We didn't watch it. We just thought, no, it's all right, we won't let him do that. And he did it right in front of us. Sometimes, sorry? Sorry, Thea. Yes, sorry, we didn't tell you. We sent your son off. Yes, with a broken nose. No, he's all right. No, he's fine. We can't stop people making wrong choices. What we can do is try and help people understand that God understands their suffering and that God can be with them in their suffering. So I find what's really important with this question is not actually, I want to get to a place where I think actually what I know of my God is that he ministers to people in their suffering. So is there an opportunity for God to minister to this person here? To bring some healing where there's hurt? And so this is an interesting one because, as much as you've got the whole, the apologetic side of things, the debate side of things, this is the one where I say you can't be too academic on it. Out of all of them, I love the academic stuff, but you can't be too academic with this. You've got to come into this with a place of, actually, I'm going to need to draw alongside this person and spend some time. Because we need to understand that, that suffering, is one of those things that backtrack slightly. If you look at the whole thing of, say, earthquakes and tsunamis. So I was in Japan. I had a former life as well, a bit like Matthew. Before I worked 2 days a week though, Matthew, not one. But there we go. So I don't know. I just doubled up on that one, but no. But before I did that, I worked with a language school company. I was principal of a private language school, and I had the privilege of just travelling to a number of places around the world each year, and Japan was one of those. And I was in Japan just literally a few months before my final time in Japan, just literally a few months before that tsunami hit. And I remember that the video of, on the news, you've got this guy and he's driving. I don't know if you remember it, there was the helicopter was looking and there's this man driving and he's driving towards, and there's this wave coming in this way. And he turns his car around and starts driving away from it. But what you can see from the helicopter, but what this guy couldn't see, was the wave coming the other way as well, until his car disappeared. And it broke my heart more than some of the things I watch around the world, because I'd not long before been there. And I love the people. And I love the place. And I'm now watching a man who thought he was driving towards destruction, then turns around and thinks, I'm getting away. But actually, it was more sure the way he was going, because it was worse that way. Now, all I can say to that is, we live in a fallen world. That's not man-made. That's not man-caused. That's not the choices of men, as far as I understand it. You know, I don't think anyone had triggered something undersea, or there'd been some nuclear explosion. This is just an earth that groans. Because the Bible teaches that that the earth is groaning. The earth itself is suffering under the pangs of sin, it says. Where sin itself is causing the very earth to allow thorns and thistles to grow up, and it creaks and groans, and so things move and things are cracking. One day God will just wrap it all up and make it brand new. But until then, it's getting worse, isn't it? And we see that around us. And sometimes, if I'm talking to people, actually the suffering has been naturally caused, then it is a case again of saying, look, we live just in a broken, fallen world. And it is getting worse. And why God's allowed that again? He could come and wrap it all up now, but that would be it. So I would then want to come into land with people on a couple of things that I wanted to really help people understand that they have value and worth because they're created in the image of God. And far from being aloof from their suffering, God actually understands it. If it's appropriate and right to do so at that time, and often with the suffering one, it's can I say with apologetics again, this is not about arming people to now go up the high street. We're not going to say in your lunch break, go and apologise someone. You know, I don't even know that's a phrase or a term. Do you know what I mean? You might just go and say sorry, but you know that you can find it. But you know, off you go now. You know, such a thing. You know, and get into a debate with someone and see if you can win it. You know, that's not what this is all about. You know, sometimes with this stuff, I found that actually I journey with people. And so this might be weeks or months where I'm walking with someone and I'm listening to somebody and I'm hearing where they're at and I'm putting the time in, and then finally I'm coming to this place because I've almost earned the right to speak, do you see? Because I've listened to them and I've spent the time. That's what was going on with the Mormon and the Jehovah's Witnesses. I was earning the right to speak because I was listening to them. Didn't have to believe it, just needed to listen and understand where they were coming from. Did you see? But by listening, I was able to put myself in their position and go, okay, what do I feel is squiffy about this? Why do I struggle with this? And so I can get people to a place where I can say, look, God, far from being aloof from this, God actually understands our suffering. Jesus had compassion. Jesus wept. Jesus suffered. There isn't anything that Jesus hasn't been through, that you're going to go through, that Jesus himself wouldn't have experienced or have experience of or understand. So far from saying, why does God allow suffering? What I can say is actually, God can speak to you in your suffering. God can help you in your suffering. Another thing with suffering as well is offering. Suffering produces fruit. Again, we'll drill down into this a little bit more later, but you know, we see people like Joseph in scriptures. In the scriptures, he really suffered, didn't he? We can sometimes read over his story, or just within one chapter we deal with his time with Potiphar and Potiphar's wife, and we just think, and then we just in another chapter he's in prison, that sort of thing. But no, he was in prison for a while. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, and that's what we've got to understand is like sometimes we read over these things and just think, well, people didn't really suffer. Do you know what I mean? They only went for a chapter or a verse. Or a paragraph. It's like, no. This is condensed. This is going on for ages and ages and ages, and they really suffered, but the fruit of that suffering was actually fruit. That sometimes, and one of the most amazing fruits that I find that comes out of people is actually their ability to empathise with other people who are going through similar things. You notice that? People who say, actually, I really get where you're coming from and what you're going through. And so the ability to kind of draw alongside and say, actually, I see what you're saying. I'm going to challenge us as Christians, because this is the whole point, is about challenging something that, it's not always helpful when someone says they're going through a difficult time to say, oh, well, I'll pray for you, brother, God's got light at the end of the tunnel, all things work together for good and stuff like that, It's okay, but I'll tell you what, our sons, when we went through a difficult time, they loved the fact, pardon my French, well, it's not French, it's just English, but we say that to excuse what we're about to say. We've got this one lady in the church who just turned around and said to one of my boys, that's just a bit crap, isn't it? I'm really sorry. And just listened. And they said that meant more to them than anyone else going, oh no, I'll just, please. I believe in the power of prayer. I do believe that God works all things together for good, but pick your moment. Do you know what I'm saying? Because sometimes when people are really hurting, my sister died. I believe in the biblical principle of heaven and hell. I believe she had no faith to speak of. I do believe in deathbed conversion, so I don't, I've not got any issue there, but she died. And actually, I found it really hard for a couple of days just to go and be amongst the church. Not because I thought the church was going to say anything wrong, but I thought they might just say it at the wrong time. And I didn't trust my response to that. Even if someone said, oh, well, you never know what she prayed on her deathbed. No, but neither do you. They're right in what they're saying, but the timing would have been wrong. Do you see? And I'm just saying sometimes we've got to be sensitive in the words that we use when we're dealing with that as well. So God does understand our suffering. He's compassionate towards it, and good can come out of it. And finally, can I say, in suffering, I've noticed with suffering that often the people who are suffering, I think that speaks more of God then sometimes people are running around being really well. Because I watch people, godly people, who are suffering and struggling with things, and I'm just thinking, I don't know how you cope with that unless you had God. Do you know what I'm saying? And I see people coping with things and wrestling with it and walking through things, and I'm thinking, the only way you're doing that, the way that you're doing it, is because of God. Isn't that right? I don't know if you know people like that. Got one lady in our church who's in a wheelchair. Not so much now. God seems to be healing her, and it's fantastic. It's a great testimony, and but she said, actually, I'm in this wheelchair. She said, I can speak to people you can't, because when you speak to them in the wheelchair, you're talking. Even if you sit down, you're still coming from this place. She said, when I'm talking to them, I'm coming from this place, and she was able to minister to those around us. So sometimes in our suffering, God can really speak to those around us. Okay, so hopefully those are just a few helpful thoughts around the whole subject and area of suffering. What we'll do this afternoon, we'll be a bit more interactive in terms of the next session, but I do want to talk a little bit around this whole thing of why specifically do Christians suffer? Okay, because there is this thing where we say, well, actually, you can have a gospel sometimes that gets preached, if you come to Jesus, he'll fix all your wrongs. You ever come across that? And I'll finish it. You'll learn from me as I like telling stories. I'll finish with one story. So, hello there. So we had one friend, Barry, his name was, and he popped along to the building we had in Ashford. And we just had this notice on the door, as a lot of churches do, if you want healing, and we're thinking healing, if you want to be prayed for, if you're unwell, all that sort of thing. And he knocks on the door and he says, I see that sign on your door, and, can I come and talk to someone? And so he got brought to me, and we sat down, and he proceeded to talk about the fact that his marriage had broken down. His wife had left him, she'd taken their daughter. He was just at rock bottom. He didn't know what to do with himself. His mum was a Christian, and she'd been praying for him, but he just said, but I'm nowhere with this. But then he said, I walked past this and I saw this stuff. He said, so the healing that I'm after is not the sort of healing I guess he said that you guys do. And I said, well, we don't do any healing. I said, God is the healer, and I said, but actually God is definitely in this business of healing. but probably not the healing you're thinking of either. So I talked to him about how God had helped me through challenging situations and difficult situations. And I said, you know, and that's what God can do for you. And he said, I'd want that. I said, but there is a caveat to that. I said, you might come to God and your marriage still might not get fixed. You might come to God and your daughter may still not be living with you. But what I promise you is this: if you come to God, he will help you through that. He will walk with you through it. He may not fix it all, because that doesn't always happen. But he will walk with you through it. And he said, yeah, okay, I want that. So I prayed with him. He gave his life to Jesus. I prayed with him and asked God to bless him and be with him. And off he went. And about 10 days later, Barry came back and he knocked on the door and he was all smiles. And do you know what? Me of little faith, I was straight away, oh, he must have got back together with her then. That'd be great, wouldn't it? That sort of thing. And he comes in, I say, how's it going? He says, man, it's a fight. He said, we're not together. He said, she now wants to keep my daughter away from me, etc. I said, but you're all smiles, Barry. He said, it's just this relationship I now have with God. He said, it's a tough life, but God is helping me through it, just like you promised, just like you said. He said, he does it, doesn't he? And I'm just like, yes, he does. You know, just like, little did you know I wasn't, but that's the reality. That's what's on offer. That's the promise, you see, and that's where I want people to get to when I'm doing it. But I don't want people to go away believing that all their ills will be fixed and everything, just because you come to God, he just band-aids over everything and everything gets easy, because that's not true. But what God does, he promises to walk with us in our suffering. Is that okay? Okay, right. We're going to let you go and have lunch now. So that's great. Hopefully you found that useful. If you want to ask any questions, talk about things, then great. If you've brought lunch, fantastic. If not, I can recommend some really good places up the town. Just go and have a look. And they say we do lunch, and that's really good. They're really good. There's loads of good places up the town. There's also a one-stop shop that way as well, isn't there? So if you want to grab some sandwiches and bring them back here. So otherwise, we'll reconvene at 1:30. So there'll be a good chance for people just to get to know one another from different churches and different places. Brilliant.